On this week's prequel episode, we follow up on our Chocolat listener polls, learn about director Zack Snyder, and preview Watchmen. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. Welcome back to another prequel episode. We've got quite a bit to get into, previewing Watchmen, among other things, so we'll get right to it with our patron shoutouts.
I put up with you because your father and mother were our finest patrons, that's why.
No new patrons this week, but we do have our Academy Award-winning Hall of Famers, the all-time greats, and they are Matilde is satisfied with the plan for TFIL merch, Steve from Arizona, Paul, Kat Insminger, Jeff Niederhofer, Teresa Schwartz, Ian from Wine Country, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Youngs, Gratch, Just Gratch, Shelby says all I want for Valentine's Day is TFIL merch, That Darn Skag, V Frank, and Alina Starkov. Thank you all very much. We appreciate you all very much and hope you have a lovely Valentine's Day, however you do or don't celebrate. All right, let's see what people had to say about Chocolat.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
So on Patreon, we had 1 vote for the movie and 0 for the book.
Mm-hmm.
Matilde is satisfied with the plan for TFIL merch, said, liked the book, preferred the movie. The book is a nice folklore tale, phantasmagoric at times, kind of like Alphonse Dudet's Letters from My Windmill, but with a darker twist. I liked the exploration of generational trauma and the mother-daughter dynamic, and Armand is a delight in the book. My main issue is I didn't feel the story fit the genre. I think chocolate, I think something sensual, and I was expecting a story that would explore the senses versus the mind. Like the perfume and style, not themes, and I was pretty disappointed on that point. It seriously lacked on the food porn. The descriptions felt more like lists than evocative scenes. The characters are more symbols than actual persons. I felt like they were stuck in their roles, the dark man, the whimsical old lady, the witch, the woman in peril, and lacked dimension and subtlety. It didn't feel grounded in reality, and in my opinion, the story needs that to be effective. My second problem with the book is very much a me problem, but I have to share it. Joanne, pick a language and stick to it, please. I couldn't stop reading French words in an English accent and vice versa. Incredibly annoying, very much a trying to make it fancy by peppering French terms everywhere move. She's a French teacher, she has no excuse. Translators exist for a reason.
I will jump in with I haven't read the book. I will say it can oftentimes be effective in some things. I can understand how it might be a problem for Matilde. I believe they are a native French speaker, from my memory, but speak English obviously very well. So at least a dual linguist. I don't know if you speak any other languages, Matilde. But so I can understand it being kind of annoying in that instance. That being said, I think for somebody who like me, who's a monolingual, if I was reading a book that is set in France, trying to give a little bit more of kind of the atmosphere using French words throughout more here and there or whatever. I think, again, without knowing how it is used in the book, I could see that working for me to kind of get my mind in the headspace of, the setting and everything. But I don't know. That would be my only kind of point.
It didn't bother me.
Okay.
But I also don't speak French.
Yeah.
So I'm able to just glaze over it.
Yeah.
Matilde went on to list a few of her own odds and ends, saying, probably an unpopular opinion, but Johnny Depp didn't do it for me in this movie. Alfred Molina, on the other hand, he plays tortured and repressed very well.
You know what? To each their own.
Not my
style. Not my cup of tea.
Not my slice of cake.
Cup of hot chocolate.
Yeah. But
fair enough.
It's good, something for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
Juliette Binoche is so cheerfully sexy in this movie. It's almost as enticing as the chocolate. To be fair, everyone is doing a wonderful job in the movie.
They are. I will agree,
Yes.
though. Juliette Binoche is entrancing in this film.
I also loved the realism of the details that were added to the characters, Luke and his drawing, Caroline and Renaud being more complex, made all of them much more relatable and believable. Mm-hmm. I don't like Rue ending up with Josephine in the novel. I felt it diminished her liberation from Sergei/Paul. That being said, even in the movie, I thought Rue wouldn't stick around and should continue his life.
Yeah.
And finally, I agree with you. Josephine and Vienne have insane chemistry. I think they should have ended up together. It's painfully obvious. Let's be real. If this movie had been made today, they would have had the balls to go
I
there.
think so. I mean,
I feel like there's a pretty good chance, at least.
They might have gone there.
Yeah.
And it's again, the movie is not, it feels like the movie is alluding. There's just the looks they share with each other are not like friend looks, I feel like. I don't know.
Honestly, I would have been satisfied if the movie had just been more about like their friendship.
Yeah.
But whatever, I guess.
I just like I said, there's some layer there that is something other than platonic in the portrayals in the film, in my opinion.
On Facebook, we had no votes, but we had a comment from Patty who said, I've only seen the movie, but this episode convinced me to go get the book, like I need more books to read.
Well, there you go. We've succeeded. Convinced at least one person to read the book.
On Twitter, we had 1 vote for the movie, 5 for the book, and 1 listener who couldn't decide. Kelly Napier said, I'm not done reading yet. Stupid ice storm and me working extra hours derailed my reading time.
I think Kelly's in broadcast news.
Yes,
so.
I believe that is correct.
I think she's a director, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew this, Kelly. I think I've mentioned this. Both of us.
Both of us worked in broadcast news.
Specifically worked in broadcast news for like 5 years.
Yeah, you much longer than I did.
Yeah, and on like more involved in the production side. I was a director for a brief time. Did everything at different points, but was a director briefly before I switched over to the marketing department. But yeah, I remember those days of ice storms and snowstorms and elections and all that sort of stuff, and just how crazy the schedule gets. And this was a fun little story. I moved after working at the news station for like a year or two. I moved within like 2 blocks of the state, or I don't know, it was not that. It was like a few blocks.
It was very close.
It was like less than 10 blocks from the station. It was like a quarter-mile walk or something like that. So I would get called in all the time when if it was stormed or snowed and like people couldn't drive. I was like, I could just walk to the station. So many a days it was actually really fun because I would wake up to go to the morning show at like 2 a.m. or whatever, because it started at 5 a.m. Or 4:30, I think was when it started. But I would just walk down the middle of our main like downtown street, because our station is like literally downtown by the river, like in the main downtown area, old town area. And I would just walk down the main thoroughfare at like 3 a.m. with snow everywhere, and felt like I was in an apocalypse like movie. Like I was like, I Am Legend. There's just like nothing. I'm just like walking down the middle of Broadway. Anyways.
So Kelly said, I'm not done reading yet, but I'm still picking it over the movie. I think this book versus movie comparison is the perfect example of the nuance given to character study that you can do in a book versus a movie. I loved the way the personalities of the characters are revealed in the book. That's just harder to do in the medium of a movie. My mom also votes for the book. She said when I told her this is what y'all were covering, I loved the book. The movie, not as good.
Oh.
I also liked the device in the book where it takes place during the 40 days of Lent. It lends itself nicely to the thought that Vienne and Anouk are transient beings, only around for a season, then gone.
I will say, that's also the case in the movie, right? Or does it? I guess it goes beyond Lent.
It's during Lent. Like the chocolate festival at the end is on Easter Sunday.
Yeah. And it's on Lent when they arrive.
Well, the movie doesn't specify at what point in the year they arrive. It says that they arrive like around the beginning of Lent.
I could have swore, because at one point I swear he was like, Lent starts tomorrow.
Oh, I
like
don't
at the
remember
beginning of the movie. I could have swore at the beginning of the movie that they were like, Lent, it starts tomorrow.
The book, like, very specifically, they arrive on Mardi Gras on Fat Tuesday.
Okay.
I think the movie could have easily accomplished something very similar by having them arrive on Ash Wednesday, and that's a really easy visual cue.
Yeah,
and everybody can have ashes on their forehead.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you, Kelly. And Shelby's in her capybara era said, Didn't read or watch, but you convinced me to put the book on my very long list of books to read.
Another person.
We love
almost
that.
the exact same comment as Patty's.
On Instagram, we had 5 votes for the movie and 3 for the book. Anal Fracture 42 said, I couldn't read the book, but also didn't particularly like the movie, so yeah, no strong opinions here. However, I wanted to thank you for the Drive episode. I listened to it while getting my wisdom teeth removed, and it made the whole procedure a lot more comfortable.
Were you awake?
It seems to imply.
I think it is some people, depending on the situation, they can remove them without putting you under. But yeah, when I got my wisdom teeth removed in like senior year of high school or junior year of high school, I got knocked out. Like they put me under, and I woke up with with 4 less teeth in my head. When
I still have all my wisdom teeth. Because I'm a horrible gremlin monster.
The dentist decided you didn't need them out. Not everybody needs them out.
Yeah, but I have more teeth than a lot of adults, which makes me feel like some kind of monstrous being.
I see.
But I like it.
But we're glad that that episode could help. It almost seems I couldn't tell if that was a good or a bad thing. Like your episode made getting my wisdom teeth removed more comfortable. Almost implies like because the episode was so bad. That
I don't think so.
I know
I don't think so.
But I think you could read it that way. That like the episode was such a nightmare that I didn't even care about the teeth thing anymore. Like in comparison, the teeth thing was fine. I know that's not what they're saying, but.
And we had one other comment on Instagram from Ricci DeVita, who said, the movie was magical. Her romantic costumes, the fairy tale instrumentals, and the jazz music, the beautiful settings and scenery. I fell in love with this movie from the first note. Full disclosure, I didn't even know this was based on a book. Also, I started following this page because I saw you were discussing Chocolat.
Well, welcome. If you're listening to the follow-up prequel episode, Reese the Diva. Or I don't actually know how to pronounce. Or where I don't know where the divides are supposed to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the divides are.
Because it's not. There's no
I went and looked at their profile, and their username was not the name that they had in their description. So I'm still not sure.
So we're not sure. But.
But I hope you stick around,
and keep enjoying.
Even though we're not discussing Chocolat anymore.
We have a huge back catalog of episodes. 100 and some 40 or something at this. I can't remember what number we're on now, but something like 100 and something.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So we got a ton, and it's like 140-ish, roughly. So yeah, we got a huge back catalog. Go check them out. And then hopefully you stick around. But thanks for listening.
And we had no feedback on Goodreads this time. So our listener poll's winner was The Book by a hair, with 8 votes to the movie's 7.
Wow.
Plus our one listener who couldn't decide.
That was pretty close.
Yeah.
Pretty close. All right. Now we're going to learn a little bit about a very controversial filmmaker, Mr. Zack Snyder.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
I know, and I have his name misspelled like all over this document.
Isn't it? It's a weird.
It's SNY, and I have the Y and the N transposed in like half of these.
Okay, well then
I'm gonna have to double check my social media.
That's weird because that's not okay. You just like mistyped it.
Yeah, I just mistyped it.
Not like thought it was spelled a different way. Okay.
So Zack Snyder is an American film director, producer, screenwriter, and cinematographer. He was raised in Connecticut and grew up a comic book and horror film enthusiast.
I don't buy that. I don't think he was a comic book fan.
You don't buy
I think
that?
I think he's a liar.
He was a fake comic book fan.
He's very clearly a gigantic comic book fan.
After high school, he studied painting at Heatherley School of Fine Art in England and then attended Art Center College of Design in California, graduating with a BFA in film. Snyder made his feature film debut with the remake of the 1978 horror film Dawn of the Dead in 2004.
Which I've heard is actually not a terrible remake.
I've never seen either, so I could not say.
It's not, again, I've heard people say it's not as good as the original one, but it's not like a terrible remake from what I've heard.
Followed by box office hit 300 in 2006, and then Watchmen in 2009. His animation debut was Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole in 2010. I didn't know he did that either. I saw that on Wikipedia and I was like, what?
That's wild.
And then he followed that with a non-adaptation, Sucker Punch, in 2011, which he also produced and co-wrote.
Which I've seen very interesting mixed opinions
Yeah,
on Sucker
a
Punch.
very, very divisive film, Sucker Punch.
As most of his films are, to be honest.
He directed 2013's Man of Steel, Superman reboot, and the kickoff of the DC Cinematic Universe. That same year, it was also announced that he would be directing 2016's Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice.
Yep.
Following that, he directed 2017's Justice League, although he eventually exited the project due to the death of his daughter and Joss Whedon took over. Snyder retained sole credit as director of that film.
Yep.
I think I found the nicest way possible to talk about the next thing. There was a divisive reaction to the theatrical cut of the film, with many fans blaming Whedon for what they felt was incohesion compared to previous films in the series. This led to an online campaign calling to, quote, release the Snyder Cut.
Yep.
Snyder's version eventually was released on HBO Max in 2021. Although it was better received than the theatrical cut, the 2017 version is still considered the official canon within the DC Cinematic Universe.
We actually do have a review of Justice League in a very early episode that I believe was not a patron, but it was early on before we started our Patreon. We were doing some generic movie
we would
reviews.
release a review episode every now and then.
Yeah, just
well,
on
and
the
it,
main
before we
feed.
started doing learning things too, we would occasionally
That's
have a
right.
segment in the prequels where we
right.
just
Talked
chit chatted
whatever.
about something we had watched.
Yeah. So we do have a review of Justice League out there. We never watched the director's cut, the Snyder cut on HBO Max because I just wasn't. I don't care.
Oh, yeah, I don't care either.
Yeah, I just was never interested. I didn't. Man of Steel was meh for me. Okay, like better than the rest of most of the other DC, or at least all of the others that like. It's better than Batman vs Superman, which is terrible, arguably the worst. I think I remember thinking Justice League was better than Batman vs Superman, but that was a very low bar.
I remember thinking that they were both kind of.
Oh yes, I agree. I remember. I think I gave like Justice League like a D+ or a C-, and Batman vs Superman like an F or something. So like very faint praise. And I think I would give Man of Steel, from my memory, I only saw it once when it came out. Like a C- or like a C or something. Like none of these are good movies in my opinion. Although there are people that like them a lot for very interesting reasons. One of my best friends, Sam, is a huge fan of all of them.
Yeah.
And he's a big comic book guy. He knows all the comic books really well. He's read them all. He loves them. And his big thing that he loves is that Snyder is very committed to translating the comic book onto the screen in a way that is very faithful. Even if not every story element is very faithful, visually it's like a very faithful adaptation, which we'll get to. But
in regard to film style, Snyder often uses slow motion, particularly the technique of speed ramping in and out of fight scenes in his films, differing from other directors who make multiple cuts and close-ups during a fight.
To some extent, yeah, he does that a lot. I mean, obviously, very famously, 300 was kind of the big kickoff of the speed ramping thing, and then he kept doing it and everything. But yeah.
I mean, if it works, it works, I guess.
It works really well in 300. I don't know how well it works in everything else he's done since then. And he doesn't use it as much, from my memory, in like some of the other Justice League stuff that he did in 300. It's constant in 300. But in 300, it was very novel, and it also sort of fit the whole aesthetic of what was going on. And anyways.
I think I found a nice way to say this, too. Snyder has been described as one of the most polarizing directors of modern cinema. In 2017, David Ehrlich of IndieWire wrote that Snyder's, quote, name alone is enough to launch 1,000 angry tweets, and the most passionate writing about his work is exclusively found in the comment sections of websites like this one. Snyder's critics really seem to hate him, and Snyder's fans really seem to hate his critics. Is Snyder a master or a hack? A misunderstood mythmaker or a meathead with a movie camera?
So we're not going to answer that question here. I will say my vibe on the whole thing is Zack Snyder seems like a very talented visual filmmaker at times, and is a very passionate filmmaker in a way that I am envious of, because he's very clearly like obsessed with all the stuff he works on. I don't think he's a very good storyteller, in my opinion. Like a lot of the stuff that he kind of like is involved in, like the writing and the directing, or and then most of the films he doesn't actually write, but like just the way he tells stories through his direction, I don't think is super effective all the time, and I think he does sacrifice a narrative cohesion and sort of thematic cohesion for the sake of the aesthetic, which I can appreciate to some extent, but it is. I don't think he's. I think it kind of comes down to where I don't think he's a misunderstood myth maker. I think there's a little bit of that. I also don't think he's a meathead. I don't think he's like a complete clown who has no idea. You know, he's not Michael Bay. Like, to me, like the meathead with a camera thing is Michael Bay. Like that applies most to somebody like Michael Bay to me. And because I actually also think that Michael Bay, and I don't know, I always just get the vibe that Michael Bay is like a much like more like cynical, like not good person, whereas Zack Snyder has always struck me as a particularly not as like a fairly like introspective and reasonable, like nice guy who like really likes the stuff he makes and isn't just like I don't know. But that being said, I don't think he's like an incredible director. I think he's just
I have not seen a ton of his films. We saw Batman vs Superman and Justice League, and I've seen Sucker Punch.
I have not seen Sucker Punch, but I've seen 300. I've seen Watchmen.
I would like to rewatch Sucker Punch at some point because I watched it maybe like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had kind of mixed feelings about it, and I'm not sure I was able to like fully grasp everything that was going on
in that movie from what I've heard.
So I would like to revisit it at some point.
I would like to see it, yeah.
But like to what you had to say about like sacrificing narrative and thematic cohesion and substance in deference to like the aesthetic or like style.
Yeah.
I feel like that works better in stories that are self-contained than it does in like sprawling epics.
Yeah.
Which might be where some of the issues with the DC movies come in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I also think he's, you know, because it's also, there's an interesting element that I think he's a very surface level, like, at least the vibe I get is he feels like a fairly surface level thematic filmmaker. Like, there's not that there's no imagery or any, like, there's tons of imagery and stuff in his movies, but it's all very surface level, and I don't think he thinks very deeply about, like, what a lot of his movies are saying necessarily.
See, and that was where I struggled with Sucker Punch, which is why I'd like to revisit it. Yeah. Because I was like, I remember watching it and being like, I feel like this is saying something, but I could not tell you what.
Yeah, and I think it is mixed, but also like, you know, because like I was a huge fan of 300 when it came out, and I haven't watched it recently, but I've seen it probably 5 or 6 times over the years. I don't remember the last time I watched it, but that movie is like deeply fascistic. But if you had to ask me, did Zack Snyder want to make a fascist sympathizing movie? I think he would be appalled at that idea. Like, I don't think he's like an incredibly like progressive filmmaker necessarily, or like, you know, I don't think he's going out of his way to like, you know, I think he likes things that are cool. I think he's like really into things that are cool and like sees some of the layers that are beneath that, but doesn't think too, because like you go back and watch 300 now, like that movie's about a bunch of ripped white dudes murdering a bunch of brown people who are like invading their land, and like and they're all like perverts and, you know, like sex pests and like criminal, like the bad guys, and like Xerxes is like clearly queer coded, and it's like it's all very fascistic.
You think he doesn't really think about it?
At least maybe not back. To be fair, that was 2000. You know, that's 15 years ago. Right. I'm not saying, you know, or whatever year that came out. I'm not saying that he hasn't thought about it since then, and I do think he does think about that stuff to at least some extent. But I don't know if he always connects the dots on what it is his movies are saying. Like, I think he sees like one layer, and he's like, you know, because obviously he very like, and again, it's it's not subtle. He very on the nose in the DC universe movies presents the Superman as Jesus kind of imagery a lot.
Yes.
Like we get a lot of that throughout the DC movies and stuff like that, among other things. And so again, it's not like he's oblivious to like symbolism and the imagery in his movies and stuff like that. I don't think. But yeah, I also don't know if he just thinks that deeply about. I think he really just likes movies that look cool, and he knows how to make cool looking movies for the most part. Like generally speaking, not everything all the time, but he has. I mean, I again, say what you want about 300. There are some just really cool stuff in that movie.
Yeah.
And now, to be fair, he's literally just ripping it off the comic book page. But he is ripping it off the cool stuff from the comic book pages and putting it in the movie. And that's one of the things that's actually really struck me, which we'll get in here in just a second. Talking about Watchmen is having seen Watchmen before reading it. I only saw it once when it came out in theaters, and I remember almost nothing about the movie. But reading it now, I'm like halfway through it currently, and I'm like, so many of these moments are just he ripped them right out of the comic book and literally just put this image on the screen, like identical, in a way that is, again, it's so I don't know. He's an interesting filmmaker, and I think he doesn't deserve the hate he gets, but he's probably, which is true of most things, but he's probably falls somewhere in that middle ground of like he doesn't deserve the hate that a lot of people give him. That being said, his movies, a lot of the more recent ones, have not been very good, and maybe all of them. I don't know, arguably. I'm holding out a little bit of. I think this one, from everything I remember and from what people have said, is probably his best movie, like overall. But I don't think he's as bad as a filmmaker as some people would like to argue that he is on the internet. But I also don't think he's. But it's funny because that was I thought this person that the Ehrlich guy made a really interesting point. They worded this line very specifically. Snyder critics really seem to hate him, and Snyder fans really seem to hate his critics. Not love his movies, hate his critics, which is a thing that I think is very true.
It's a different thing.
It's a different thing, and I think they do like his movies, at least to some extent, but even the most adamant Snyderverse, DC Snyderverse supporters that I've seen, maybe not the most, because there are some crazy people on Twitter, but like in person, the people that I've talked to who defend the Snyderverse DC stuff still admit they're not great. Like there's a lot of things in the movies that are like not very good, and this doesn't really make blah blah blah, like it doesn't really connect with, but they just really like overall the fact that he is very committed to taking some of their most beloved comics and putting them on the screen. It's like they love the idea of what he's doing, I think, more than what he actually does, is kind of what it feels like sometimes. I don't know.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Which is interesting. Again, I think he's a very interesting filmmaker from that regard, because he is very arguably the most polarizing modern director who isn't embroiled in some sort of weird controversy, who doesn't have he's not like Roman Polanski or something like that.
A different kind of polarizing.
A different kind of polarizing. But barring those kind of people, I think he definitely is up there amongst and especially in just general audience polarizing, because I'm sure there are more polarizing directors among critics or something, film snobs and stuff. I'm sure they have, but among mass general population audiences, he's got to be the most polarizing, which is it's really interesting. All right, speaking of arguably maybe his best movie, we'll see. It's been a while since I've seen it. Let's go ahead and talk about the comic book it was based on, Watchmen.
Watchmen. One of us died tonight. Somebody knows why. Somebody knows.
I heard he'd been working for the government. Maybe it was a political killing.
Maybe someone's picking off costumed heroes.
John thinks that there's going to be a nuclear war.
What if that's why someone wants us out of the way? So we can't do anything to stop it. An attack on one is an attack on all of us.
Watchmen are over. What do you suggest we do about it?
Retribution.
Watchmen is a maxi series comic book published in 1986 and 1987 in monthly installments, before it was collected into a single volume, 12 monthly installments. It was written by Alan Moore, who's known for Batman the Killing Joke, V for Vendetta, From Hell, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Swamp Thing, and many more. Alan Moore's arguably the one of him and Frank Miller, the two biggest names in comic books in the last 100 years, or, ever, arguably. They're up there for sure. And illustrated by Dave Gibbons, who's known primarily for this, but also Green Lantern and Superman for the Man, or it's called For the Man Who Has Everything, but it's a Superman story. And among other things as well, but those are his other kind of biggest things. When discussing where the idea for Watchmen came from, Alan Moore said, quote, "I suppose I was just thinking that'd be a good way to start a comic book. Have a famous superhero found dead. And so as the mystery unraveled, we would be led deeper and deeper into the real heart of this superhero's world and show a reality that was very different to the general public image of the superhero." So this is this is the beginning of the deconstruction of a super, like what is, kind of this is the boy, I mean, people know this. Watchmen is the boys before the boys was, basically, to some extent. It's like, let's take superheroes.
The deconstruction of the myth.
Yeah, and deconstruct them and kind of tear them down. And it's also very funny to me. It actually makes it very interesting that Zack Snyder is the person directing this, because it I don't know. This is interesting because he has such a deep love for all of these superheroes to be the person helming, which maybe it works in its own way, but being the person helming the film that is like a breakdown and deconstruction of the whole mythos of superheroes and stuff like that, when he is like the world's biggest Superman fan. Like, it's just a very interesting dynamic, I think. But potentially it could work. We'll see when we watch it. So initially, Moore used this premise that he came up with and made a proposal to sell to DC, I believe. But he wanted to use pre-existing DC characters that they had just got from some other comic. They had purchased some characters from some other smaller comic book company or whatever. And he wanted to use this idea he came up with pre-existing characters. And the original title for this like treatment that he was going to send to DC, that he sent to the DC's managing editor, Dick Giordano, was originally called Who Killed the Peacemaker? Peacemaker being a comic book character that people are aware of now because of Suicide Squad and the Peacemaker show. But they were like, this is cool, but can we not use characters that we already, because we don't want to kill off these characters or do weird things with them. We liked the idea, but can we do it with like original characters? And Moore said, quote, "DC realized their expensive characters would end up either dead or dysfunctional," end quote. So instead, Giordano, again, the DC managing editor, persuaded Moore to continue the idea with new characters. And Moore was like, I don't know if that's going to work. He didn't think original characters would provide the emotional resonance resonance that like that characters that readers already had an attachment to. He didn't think it would work with brand new characters, but he would eventually change his mind and said, quote, "Eventually I realized that if I wrote the substitute characters well enough so that they seemed familiar in certain ways, certain aspects of them brought back a kind of generic superhero resonance or familiarity to the reader, then it might work." So he basically was like, I'll just write archetypes, kind of.
I think that's a fair tactic, because a lot of superheroes are playing on those archetypes. That come to us through mythology and the very bowels of time and storytelling.
Yes, absolutely. So Dave Gibbons, the artist for Watchmen, had collaborated with Moore on previous projects, and he recalled, quote, "I must have heard on the grapevine that he was doing a treatment for a new miniseries. So I rang him up saying that I'd like to be involved with whatever he was doing, and then Moore sent him the outline. And after some brief discussion, DC's editor and Moore and Gibbons spent a day together creating the characters and outlining the story. And they were particularly inspired, apparently, by a Mad parody, like Mad Magazine parody of Superman called Super Duper Man. But instead of kind of doing that version, which is like very silly and humorous, they wanted to take it in a very like deadly serious way, where everything was very dramatic and treated completely, seriously, as opposed to the campy comedic style of Super Duper Man. And Moore said that his intention initially was to create, quote, "a superhero Moby Dick, something that had the sort of weight, that sort of density." which so far from my reading he has achieved, because it is heavy, let me tell you. Then Moore came up with the character names and descriptions, but completely left how they looked up to Gibbons. And apparently Gibbons didn't like sit down and like plan out and design these characters. He just kind of did it willy-nilly over the course of a few weeks, kind of just doing sketches. And he also very specifically designed them to make them easy to draw. And he said Rorschach is his favorite to draw because, quote, you just have to draw a hat. If you can draw a hat, then you've drawn Rorschach. You just draw kind of a shape for his face and then put some black blobs on it and you're done. Which I don't know. It was interesting because I was like, I mean, I guess it is easier than drawing other people's faces, but he is incredibly talented artist. When you're looking at this, it's like, how hard is it for you to draw anything? Because like, I would do that because I'm a bad artist. Like, I would be a terrible artist. Like, oh man, what a relief! I can just draw a simple thing. But like, all of his stuff in this is so detailed and so intricate and so incredible that it's just like, I guess I get it, but. Feel like you didn't really need to take a shortcut there. But it is a very unique and interesting character design. So when writing the script for the first issue, Moore said he realized, quote, I only had enough plot for 6 issues and we were contracted for 12. His solution for this was to alternate issues that dealt with the actual plot that he had outlined with origin issues for the characters. So you kind of go back and forth between what is happening in the story and the backstory for the actual characters that are involved in the story. And Moore would apparently write very detailed scripts for Gibbons to work from. And Gibbons recalled that, quote, the script for the first issue of Watchmen was, I think, 101 pages of typescript, single-spaced, with no gaps between the individual panel descriptions or even between the pages. That is psychopath writing. It's just like this manifesto, all like, yeah. He said upon receiving the scripts that he would number each page in case he dropped them. Because if I dropped them on the floor, it would take me 2 days to put them back together in the right order. So he would number them immediately because it was just impossible to keep everything straight. Apparently, Moore would occasionally contact Neil Gaiman for answers for research questions and for quotes to include in the issues. Every section, every issue ends with like a quote from somebody or something, and it's also like involved or incorporated into the name of the issue. And apparently Neil Gaiman was involved in a lot of that, and Neil Gaiman actually gets a special thanks at the beginning. I noticed that when I opened the first page, it says like special thanks, and there's like 3 people, and Neil Gaiman was one of them, which I thought was interesting. So Alan Moore was committed to stay ahead of schedule on this. He did not want to fall behind and have delays, but unfortunately, there were delays nonetheless. And Gibbons has said that the major contributing factor to that was that Moore would send him the script eventually like 2 or 3 pages at a time. Yeah. He said he would literally call him on the phone and beg him to send him more of the script so that he could draw it. And as they began to hit deadlines, apparently Moore would hire a taxi driver to drive the 50 miles between him and Gibbons's house or whatever and hand deliver the script to Gibbons. And on later issues, he even had his wife and son draw panel grids on pages to help him save time because they were so behind schedule. So a thing that's interesting that I had not heard, near the end of the project, Moore realized that the story actually kind of resembled an Outer Limits television episode, which is similar to like Twilight Zone, called The Architects of Fear. And apparently Moore and Wine, who was an editor with DC, argued over changing the ending because it was so similar to the show, or to that episode of the show. And when Moore refused to change it, Wine quit the company, or quit working on the book, rather, and explained, quote, I kept telling him, be more original, Alan. You've got the capability. Do something different, not something that's already been done. And he didn't seem to care enough to do that, end quote. And apparently in the final episode, or the final issue of the series, Moore acknowledged the Outer Limits episode by referencing it. And he like... By the time he got to the end, he was like, I'll just put in a reference to the episode instead of changing my ending.
I'll just cite my sources.
Yeah, right. I'll just cite my sources instead of changing it. So structurally, apparently, certain aspects, so just to be very clear, I am not a comic book reader. I have read maybe a dozen comic books in my entire life. and I couldn't even tell you what. A couple episodes of Deadpool, or not episodes, issues of Deadpool, a few random, a couple of the early issues of Walking Dead, or like, I think I read like the first, because they collect those in like seasons, not seasons,
like volumes.
But like volumes. I read maybe the first 1 or 2 volumes of Walking Dead, and then I've read all of, up until what I think it's coming out soon, of Saga.
Yeah.
So that's like the extent of my experience reading or, engaging with actual comics or graphic novels. Unless you count reading a ton of Calvin and Hobbes when I was a kid. That's a little bit different, which I did. I read it. We had like every collection of Calvin and Hobbes, and I read all of them when I was little. But anyway, so apparently structurally, there are aspects of Watchmen that are very different from the norm in comic books at the time in the 80s. And that in particular, that being the panel layout and the coloring. So instead of panels of various sizes, which was common, Gibbons decided to divide Gibbons and Moore decided to divide each page into a 9-panel grid. And they really liked this system because of its, according to Gibbons, its authority is what he said, is what he described it as. And Moore specifically liked the 9-panel grid because it gave him, quote, a level of control over the storytelling that he hadn't had previously. And then Gibbons said, quote, there was this element of the pacing and visual impact that he could now predict and use to dramatic effect, which I think is interesting. It makes a lot of sense if you know, which the book doesn't actually follow exactly the 9-panel grid all the time. Some of them they take the 9-panel grid and turn it into 1 panel, or they take 2 of the panels. So there is still within the 9-panel grid thing. Sometimes they'll combine like the middle it'll be like 3 single panels, then 1 big one in the middle, and then 3 at the bottom or whatever. They do mix it up still, but they follow the general outline of that. And it definitely gives you a very consistent, grid or, kind of framework to design your story and reveal around, which is always the thing I found fascinating about comics, even though I don't really read them, is the way they, you figure out like reveals of like turning like where story beats fall in the actual physical pages, and like so you turn a page and you get like this big moment, and like the actual layout and structure of comics I've always found very fascinating, again, even as a person who doesn't really read them. So the title of the series, Watchmen, refers to the question, quote, who will watch the Watchmen themselves, which was famously posed by Roman satirist Juvenal. And Moore claimed apparently to be unaware of this phrase's origins. He can't. Well, I think he probably heard it somewhere and was like, who watches the Watchmen? But apparently didn't know that it came from a Roman satirist named Juvenal. There was a sequel to Watchmen published in 2016 called Doomsday Clock. It sounds complicated to me. I don't know exactly how direct of a sequel it is, but it's part of the DC Rebirth line of comics, and it was not written by Alan Moore. It was actually written by Jeff Johns, another big name in comics that I've heard of him. So if I've heard of you and you're a comic book writer, you're a big name in
You've
comic
made
books.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the 2019 HBO miniseries is also kind of a sequel. So Damon Lindelof was the showrunner on that, and he described it as a remix. It's narratively a sequel, but it also introduces a new set of characters and a story that he felt made the work unique enough without being a full reboot of the comic series. It's interesting.
I didn't know that was. I thought it was just like an adaptation.
No, it is not a direct. It is like a sequel, kind of. Like none of the characters are the same. Well, I don't want to say none. There may be some. I don't know exactly how it all works, but because we have not watched that, so I don't know. I do want to watch it, but I wanted to wait until, because I've heard it's fantastic, but I wanted to wait until we did this eventually.
Yeah.
So I had a better point of reference for it. So when Watchmen was released, it received tons of praise. Time magazine, which noted that the series was, quote, by common assent, the best of its breed, of the new waves of comics published at the time, praised Watchmen as, quote, a superlative feat of imagination combining sci-fi, political satire, knowing evocations of comics past, and bold reworkings of current graphic formats into a dystopian mystery novel. So yeah, very, very high praise from lots of people. It won the 1988 Hugo Award in the Other Forms category, which I guess is, they probably have a graphic novel category now.
I would think so.
Or something like that, but yeah. But according to Dave Gibbons, the artist, Alan Moore had his Hugo Award placed upside down in his garden and used it as a bird bath.
Oh, God.
Supposedly. This is what Dave Gibbons said. It went on to become one of the best-selling graphic novels ever published. It's the only graphic novel to appear on Time's 2005 all-time 100 greatest novels list. It was also that was also where Time critic Lev Grossman described the story as, quote, a heart-pounding, heartbreaking read and a watershed in the evolution of a young medium. I guess young, kind of.
Yeah, I mean,
comics have been around
compared
since the 30s, but
compared
or
to
20s
compared to other mediums, though, like compared to the novel or
Right.
the short
I mean,
story,
yes.
it's a young medium.
Yeah, even compared to film, it's, at least
At least a little younger than film. Yeah.
At least like 30 or 40 years or something, 20 or 30 years, whatever. But yeah, in 2008, Entertainment Weekly placed Watchmen at number 13 on its list of the best 50 novels printed in the last 25 years, describing it as, quote, the greatest superhero story ever told and proof that comics are capable of smart, emotionally resonant narratives worthy of the label literature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then finally, my favorite fun fact that I've maybe ever found. I'm not joking. I had no idea about this. This is incredible.
I screamed on the inside when I read this.
Watchmen was one of the 2 comic books alongside Batman: The Dark Knight Returns, which is the Frank Miller, one of the Frank Miller ones, I believe, that inspired designer Vincent Conner when he created Comic Sans. So you have Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns to thank for Comic Sans, which is amazing.
It's an amazing comic book, but God, at what cost?
What hath thou wrought?
Cost?
Yes. Incredible. I love that so much. I was like, that's fantastic. I had no idea, and I just it's amazing.
I would like to know more about like what specifically did what made him think, aha, I will design the world's worst font.
I think, well, so he clearly is just, because if you look at Comic Sans, it just kind of looks like the font in comic books. Like, that's why it's called Comic Sans.
Fair enough.
And specifically, if you read Watchmen, it's. I will say that Comic Sans is a much worse font than the font in Watchmen. Like, it is not the font in Watchmen. Also, the font in Watchmen changes based on characters a lot, so it's not identical the whole time. But kind of the general font that you get when people are talking and in the the description, whatever. I'm sure those have a name in comics that I don't know. The bubbles and stuff.
Oh, yeah, I think they do, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
Anyways, but so you could tell that it's like Comic Sans was inspired by it, but Comic Sans is definitely a less interesting version of the font that is used throughout Watchmen. So yeah. All right, that's it for the book. It's time now to learn a little bit more about Watchmen, the film.
We can save this world.
Why would I save the world I no longer have any stake in?
Do it for me.
Will look up and shout, "Save us." And I'll whisper, "No."
Watchmen is a 2009 American superhero thriller film based on the 1986 to 1987 DC Comics limited series, as you just discussed. The film has a 7.6 on IMDb, 65% on Rotten Tomatoes, and a 56 on Metacritic. This property had a very long road getting to the big screen. I was going through the Wikipedia page and looking at all of the directors and writers who at one point were attached to this.
Oh, yeah?
And there's nobody that's like so crazy that you're like, whoa, why that person? But like, we could have ended up with some very interesting variations on this film, I think. So Producers Lawrence Gordon and Joel Silver first acquired the film rights in 1986 for 20th Century Fox. Author Alan Moore declined to write a script, so they brought in Sam Hamm.
What a name.
Whose best known screenwriting credit is probably for Tim Burton's Batman. However, the project never got off the ground, and in 1991, Fox put it into turnaround and it was moved to Warner Brothers, where Terry, is it Gilliam or Gilliam?
It's Gilliam.
Terry Gilliam of Monty Python fame was attached to direct, but the team was unable to raise the necessary budget. Gilliam eventually left, describing Watchmen as, quote, unfilmable, and Warner Brothers dropped the project.
I mean, I could see why would say it's unfilmable. I don't think it's unfilmable, but I could see why you might. There are definitely parts of it that feel unfilmable. Big parts of it, I'm like, this is very filmable. But there are definitely sections of it where I'm like, I don't have any idea how you would film this. But yeah.
In 2001, Gordon partnered with producer Lloyd Levin, and they took the project to Universal Studios, hiring David Hayter, who wrote the first X-Men movie, to write the script.
Also, to be fair to Terry Gilliam, he was saying that in 1991, correct?
Yeah.
CG, not the powerhouse that it was.
Right, no. That's very fair.
When Zack Snyder made this movie, so yeah.
So they hired David Hayter, who wrote the first X-Men movie, to do a script, but they ended up leaving Universal due to creative differences. They tried again at Revolution Studios, but the project fell apart there as well. The project then moved to Paramount Pictures, where it never got off the ground, but it did run through 3 different directors. Michael Bay.
Oh, that would have been a nightmare. Like, just the worst. That's insane to me.
Darren Aronofsky.
That could have worked, sure.
And Paul Greengrass is probably best known for directing a handful of Bourne sequels.
Yeah, I could see Paul Greengrass being okay-ish. Darren Aronofsky makes a lot of sense to me.
In 2005, the project once again ended up at Warner Brothers. While there, Tim Burton expressed an interest in directing.
I don't think that would have worked. I'm going to be real honest. I don't
Tim
think
Burton's
tonally,
Watchmen.
I don't think that would have worked at all.
But he ultimately turned it down. However, the studio was impressed with 300, and they approached Snyder to direct, and brought in Alex Say, I think, to adapt the script. And he returned the setting to its Cold War origins, whereas Hayter's script had moved the setting to modern times.
Oh, weird. That would be weird.
Yeah, that would be. I would be,
because the Cold War is so pivotal to like the whole everything that is going on. Again, halfway through it right now, but it seems so integral to like the entire DNA of the story that if you didn't have it set during the Cold War, it would be very tough to. I'm not saying you couldn't move it; it would just be very tough.
Yeah. So because the film rights had changed hands so many times, Warner Brothers actually had to cut deals with both Paramount and Fox, with Paramount getting the rights for international distribution of Watchmen and 25% of the film's ownership, and Fox received an upfront payment and a percentage of the worldwide gross of the film and all sequels and spin-offs. I don't know if that includes the HBO series or not.
I would think that would be considered a sequel or spin-off, so yeah probably.
But now, finally, there's an actual movie being made.
Yep.
So production took place from September 2007 to February 2008. It was shot in Vancouver, as well as on sound stages and against green screens, obviously. There were 10 different visual effects companies involved with the production for all that good CGI. Illustrator Dave Gibbons, whom you talked about, worked as an advisor on the film, but Alan Moore refused to have his name attached to any film adaptation of his work.
I don't know anything about Moore, but he seems like an eccentric weirdo.
Seems maybe Don't come for me, Alan Moore fans. He seems, just at first blush, from the things I've learned about him here, he seems maybe a little insufferable.
Yeah, I get that vibe. He definitely, he's a very talented person, but he definitely strikes me as a little bit like, oof.
And I know you said at the beginning of the episode we were going to have people mad that we didn't cover Alan Moore.
Instead of, Zack Snyder.
I wanted, the primary reason was that I wanted something short. We also may or may not have something coming down the line later this year. Also with Alan Moore related.
What a tease. What a tease.
So you can look forward to that, Alan Moore stands. Anyway, Moore has stated that he has no interest in seeing Snyder's adaptation. He told Entertainment Weekly in 2008, quote, "There are things that we did with Watchmen that could only work in a comic, and were indeed designed to show off things that other media can't."
I mean, I'll agree with that, at least so far. There are definitely elements of stuff in the graphic novel that you're like, yeah, I don't think you could do this in a film. It would just be very difficult. Like some of the way the narrative jumps around, and not even the narrative jumps around, but like the way they interweave. It's so hard to describe, but in particular, there's one thing is the chapter or the issue I was just reading today of like this character who's reading a comic book within the universe, and we're cutting between the character reading the comic book is being talked to by another character in the world of Watchmen, but then we're also jumping into the world of the comic book the kid is reading, and it's the action within the comic book that he's reading kind of mirrors some of what is happening in a separate storyline that is also happening at the same time with like Rorschach. It's very interesting. I don't know if you could even remotely begin to do it in a movie.
I will say I am glad that you're reading this one, because I just have always struggled to read comics. It doesn't work well with my brain, I think. I just struggle with knowing where to look and like how to follow. And I understand that there's a flow to it, that there's like a system. I think you wouldn't have as much issues with this. But I have just always struggled with like following the flow of like a comic graphic novel format.
Yeah, and that's fair. I will say I don't think you would have much issue with this. Sometimes it's a little confusing, the layers and knowing like when or where we are like in the story. But in terms of the flow and stuff, I think it's one of the things that's reiterating, I am not a graphic novel reader, so like I don't have the experience of like knowing quote unquote how to read comics or graphic novels, but I find this very intuitive, and I think part of that might be the 9-grid format thing and stuff, and the way the text is laid out makes a lot of sense to me. It's not confusing in a way that sometimes like the speech bubbles and stuff of like who's saying what, because that's occasionally an issue, like which ones do I have not had that issue yet. I found it very intuitive overall. So I do think you would have had an okay time at least like in theory reading this, because it's not, I find it very intuitive in a way that I was worried it might not be. Again, it doesn't mean it's not complicated and there's tons of stuff, interesting layers and stuff going on, but it is pretty intuitive to read.
I have a few casting notes, obviously, because this was attempted at so many studios. We've got a lot of different things going on. So in the movie that we got, Malin Ackerman was cast as Silk Spectre II.
Yeah, Lori.
Yeah. In earlier attempts to make the film, Hilary Swank, Natalie Portman, Rachel Weisz, Jennifer Connelly, and Jessica Alba were all considered for that part.
Just let's round up all the brunettes in Hollywood.
Bring me all the brunettes.
All the brunettes that were popular in the early 2000s. Round them up.
Billy Crudup plays Dr. Manhattan, but his CGI body
Sean Osterman
was based on fitness model and actor Greg Plitt. Keanu Reeves was also offered this role, but he passed on it.
That would have been incredible. I would have paid so much money to see Dr. Manhattan played by Keanu Reeves. That I can see why somebody thought that was a good idea. I don't know if it would have been, but I can see the reasoning behind it, I feel like.
Snyder initially wanted Jude Law for the part of Ozymandias. Tom Cruise also expressed interest in that role.
Do you know if that's how that's pronounced, or is that just a guess? Because I have always pronounced it Ozymandias. Like I put the emphasis on the M-A-N part. Ozymandias.
Ozymandias.
I don't know. I was just wondering. I didn't know if you knew.
I mean, I think that's how it's pronounced.
Because I thought it might be something from. Because isn't Ozymandias like a name from something like literature or something or
what is that from?
It's from something.
Oh, it's Percy by Shelley. It's Percy Shelley poem. That's the.
And I don't remember how they say it in the movie.
Is that the look upon your works, ye mighty, in despair? When
I don't know.
I should know this. Yes, it is. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Hang on.
Oh, I think that is that because I'm pretty sure that line is in the graphic novel, or at least in the movie. Maybe I think that's in. I think it's in there. I think that's why his name is that.
Ozymandias.
See, that's kind of how I've said it, Ozymandias, but I don't know. I do like Ozymandias. It sounds cooler.
I feel like I have like a very distinct memory of a teacher pronouncing it Ozymandias.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe we'll find out.
And as we know, teachers are always correct about pronunciation.
Okay, well, when it's a literature professor, like I feel like I get a pass for putting my trust in that.
No, I understand why you. Yeah.
Anyway, that role ended up going to Matthew Goode.
Mm-hmm.
Jackie Earle Haley, who plays Rorschach, was the only cast member who had read the comic, and he actively campaigned for the role. His agent came up with the idea that they should do a shoestring budget audition tape of Haley wearing his own, quote, little cheesy Halloween Rorschach outfit. After viewing the tape, Snyder cast Haley in the role, saying, quote, very low tech, but awesomely acted. Clearly, there was no other Rorschach.
Interesting. Look. I'm not saying Rorschach is a very interesting character, but he's also a fucking Nazi. So it's just a little weird to me to be like, I really want to play this character. I don't know. Again, he's a very interesting character. He's a terrible person. He's a fucking fascist. Like
I don't know anything about that other than blotch facey face.
Yeah,
man.
I will say that
I
think that I'm looking at this through 2022 lens of having a better understanding of media and stuff. Like I don't think I would have got that impression had I read this when I was 20.
Yeah,
I would be like, he's just a badass. Like he's a cool guy who like says sweet one-liners and talks about how the world's infested with filth and he like breaks people's arms and stuff. Like he just seems like a cool, like I get like if you're not really thinking about what his character is, but the book literally goes out of its way to be like, hey, this guy's like, it's like a fucking, he's a Nazi. Like I don't know, it's just weird. Yeah.
So the film wasn't a flop exactly, but it wasn't a stunning success either. It grossed 185.3. I put million there, but I feel like I meant billion.
No, you meant million.
I meant million.
Yeah.
100 against a budget of 138 million. In its opening weekend, it had the biggest number of screenings for an R-rated film, breaking the previous record held by The Matrix Reloaded, as well as being the highest opening weekend of any Alan Moore adaptation. However, attendance significantly dropped following its first week at the box office. It was a 67.7 overall decrease in ticket sales. At the time of its release, one of the highest for a major comic book film.
I will say it's one of those things where, and it makes perfect sense to me that it would drop off severely and keep dropping. It's if you don't know what this is going in, and I'll when I edit this prequel, I'll watch the trailer because I'll put it in the episode. I don't remember what the trailers looked like, but if you're going into this coming off of Iron Man or whatever, and this is how I remember thinking this at the time, I'm going to get a Spider-Man, X-Men, whatever. It's a comic book. It's a super. If you don't know anything about Watchmen, you would be like, general audiences would be like, what the fuck is this? This is like it's not remotely what you want or expect going into a superhero movie.
So the film then continued to drop about 60% in almost every subsequent weekend, leaving the top 10 in its fifth weekend and the top 20 in its seventh. Watchmen was the sixth highest grossing R-rated film of 2009, behind The Hangover, Inglourious Basterds, District 9, Paranormal Activity, and It's Complicated. At the North American box office, Watchmen currently sits in the lower half of the 34 films based on DC Comics, narrowly ahead of 1997's Batman and Robin. And it was the 31st highest grossing film of 2009. It was nominated for 1 award at the 2009 VES Awards, 7 awards at the 36 Saturn Awards, and 13 awards at the 2009 Scream Awards. The film was also pre-nominated for the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, although it did not make the final shortlist. Critics were divided on the film. Patrick Colin of IGN Australia awarded it a perfect 10 out of 10 and said, quote, "It's the Watchmen film you always wanted to see but never expected to get." Roger Ebert gave it 4 out of 4 stars and wrote, quote, "It's a compelling, visceral film, sound images and characters combined into a decidedly odd visual experience that evokes the feel of a graphic novel." Kyle Smith of the New York Post, comparing it to some of Stanley Kubrick's films, wrote, quote, "Director Zack Snyder's cerebral, scintillating follow-up to 300 seems, even to even a weary filmgoer's eye, as fresh and magnificent in sound and vision as 2001.
Wow. All right.
I feel like you're really building it up there, Kyle.
Yeah, well, am I wrong? Is the New York Post not an absolute rag? Could be wrong.
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure that it was.
I just picked the reviews that are most interesting.
Yeah, no, I get that. New York Post is like a rag. That doesn't mean that they don't have or didn't have a perfectly fine movie reviewer, but the Post, I'm pretty sure, is like an absolute, like, it's like one step above like the National Enquirer or whatever. But.
However, much like your opinions on the New York Post, not everyone was sold on this film. Philip Kennicott of the Washington Post, for example, wrote, quote, "Watchmen is a bore. It sinks under the weight of its reverence for the original." David Edelstein of New York Magazine agreed, saying, quote, "They've made the most reverent adaptation of a graphic novel ever, but this kind of reverence kills what it seeks to preserve. The movie is embalmed." And Devin Gordon, writing for Newsweek, said, quote, "That's the trouble with loyalty. Too little, and you alienate your core fans. Too much, and you lose everyone and everything else."
Interesting. Yeah,
that's interesting because I feel like, and pretty much all of the reviews, like the negative reviews that I looked at, were in this vein. And I think that's interesting because I feel like it dovetails with what you were saying about like Snyder in general, that he's very, very invested in like putting the comic book directly on the screen. And obviously that doesn't work for everyone.
And it also might not, I'd be interested to see, because so just to kind of go back, I actually am really glad I watched this in theaters when it came out and have not watched it since then, because I think it will make for an interesting experience now, having read it and then going back to watch the movie again. Because I can tell already, one, I'm enjoying reading the graphic novel more than I enjoyed watching the movie the first time, by far.
Yeah.
That being said, I did not go into Watchmen the first time I saw it knowing what it was or had any idea what it was even trying to do. I was like, it was like, I was 20. We were like in college and we're like, oh, let's go see the new.
Yeah, the new superhero movie,
like whatever.
Sure.
And I'm interested to see if the trailers kind of sold it, if they tried to do that thing where they're like, it's like a normal superhero movie. And whereas I'm wondering if I would go, I'd be really interested to see your opinion on it, not having read the graphic novel and seeing it for the first time. I think we'll get a really interesting kind of combination of perspectives on it, because I am very excited to watch it because, again, halfway through the graphic novel so far, it's spoilers, it's a very problematic graphic novel. I mean, people already knew that. It's, it was written in the 80s or whatever, but it's incredibly good. Like, it's very compelling and very interesting. And just, again, without a big frame of reference for graphic novels as a whole, I can understand why this would be so highly regarded, because it is just doing things with a graphic novel that I would never have expected a graphic novel to do, really, in terms of how it plays with and it's so funny. I think the thing that kind of struck me of people saying it's unfilmable or but how could you make this a new movie, it's wild to me because I'm like, throughout so much of it, again, there are parts where I'm like, I don't know how I would film this, but so much of it I'm like, this reads like I'm watching a movie. Like it's so visceral. Like and that's one of the, again, I'm sure one of the reasons it was so popular and well regarded is that you can like hear and just it's I'm reading a comic book, but it feels like I'm watching a TV show or a movie or something. Like it just feels like watching Prestige in the sense that like you can hear the pages and like I can imagine the movement. It's just interesting. Like I totally get why it's so highly regarded. But I'm very interested to see how it translates, and I have a feeling I'm gonna really like the movie this time. Whereas I didn't really care that much. I didn't hate it the first time. I was like, whatever. It's kind of boring. Like it was like fine, but kind of boring was my initial take the first time I saw it.
I'm surprised I did not get roped into seeing this one in the theaters when it came out.
Yeah.
Based on the person I was dating at the time. But I actually do have an anecdote. I think this is funny about this movie. I have like a very vivid memory of watching the trailer for this movie in my freshman year dorm, and my roommate at the time was like very, very religious. And the trailer uses that one Muse song where they keep repeating like you'll burn in hell, you'll burn in hell.
Yeah.
And she got like really upset about it. Not like offended, but like existential crisis,
Right.
like upset at the concept of like burning in hell. And I was like, I don't think they mean you. Like, I don't think they
They're
mean
not
you
judging
personally.
That's so funny. Oh, that's hilarious. And I am another small detail. We talked earlier about Zack Snyder and being an interesting choice to adapt this. And you know, everybody's talking about all the reviews talking about how faithful it was. I actually think in our discussion, well, obviously we'll get into this in the main episode, but our discussion about how like I'm not sure how deeply he thinks, you know, how deeply he delves into like thematically what the stories he's telling are saying. And I actually think that might be perfect for this.
Interesting.
In the sense that I think if somebody thought too much about what this story was trying to say, they might try to like tweak / enhance the mess. Like they might try to like massage the story into like a framework or into like a thematic framework that they think it's trying to say, or like that they think works better, or I actually think there might be something, and we'll see. I obviously, not having watched the movie, I think there might be something really compelling about having a director who's just super committed to putting this piece of work on screen as literally as possible, barring, again, from what I've heard, a very major change at the end, that is like actually kind of serves it better than somebody who might understand the story better than he did. So like I think actually you might be less, that you might get a worse adaptation from somebody who understood the story more. Maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Maybe. I don't know. Again, without having watched it yet, but I could see that being the case, that because the story is so layered and nuanced and convoluted and it's saying so many things, that it's somebody trying to figure out what it's saying and put it on screen with a like edit it in a way where it's, I don't know. We'll see. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation, but it's just as I was thinking about it, I was like, actually, Zack Snyder might be perfect for something like this, because it's just like, here it is, this weird thing. I'm not gonna like. I don't get it. Here, maybe you will. Like, I don't know.
Why did I just visualize like a cat setting a dead mouse at your feet? Like, here. I don't know why that was the visual that came into my head.
I think more reasonably, like a cat setting a drone that it caught out of midair at your feet. I mean, like, I don't know what the fuck this is,
but maybe
you will like it. I liked it. I thought it was cool, and I wanted to get it for you here. Like, I feel like I'm not sure I understand what it is. Maybe you will. Here it is. I don't know. And again, I'm probably short selling Zack Snyder a little bit. I don't mean to say that he didn't understand at all what the story was about. But again, just kind of from the vibe I've gotten from the other movies of his that I've seen, it's just like maybe his slightly more surface level understanding of the story might actually benefit it. We'll see. We shall see. Oh boy. Okay. As always, you can do us a giant favor by heading over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Goodreads, any of those places. Give us, follow us, like us, subscribe to us, interact. We love to hear your feedback and talk about it on these prequel episodes. Also, head over to, not iTunes. What is it called now? Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you can give us a review. Leave us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate it. Also, if you head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit, you can support us there for a few bucks a month. Get access to stuff, including bonus content at the $5 and up level, and at the $15 and up level, you get your name read at the beginning of every prequel episode like I did earlier, but also you get priority recommendation status, which is what this is. Who was this requested by?
So this was a request from Ben Wilcox.
Ben Wilcox.
Ben is not currently a patron.
But was for quite a while.
Ben was a patron for a long time and had to drop subscription and messaged us to ask if he could put in one last request.
Yep.
And I said, yes, of course.
Yep.
Ben is also currently in law school.
Oh.
Congratulations, Ben. Good luck.
Good luck. Fantastic. But yes, at $15 level, you get access to that priority recommendation where we'll take your recommendation and throw it as high in the list as we can. So do that. Katie, where can people watch Watchmen?
Well, you can check with your local library. I feel like good chance they'll have this one. Or if you still have a local video rental store, you can check with them.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you can stream this with a subscription to HBO Max. You can also do that through Amazon Prime.
I think other services too. Yeah, wherever you can get HBO.
I'm not entirely sure how that works.
It's HBO owns it, so anywhere you can get HBO, you can watch the movie, I'm sure. If you have DirecTV or whatever, sorry.
Otherwise, you can rent it for around $3 to $4 through Apple TV, Amazon, YouTube, Vudu, Redbox, DirecTV, AMC Theaters on Demand, or Spectrum TV.
Yeah, and if you have HBO through those, you might be able to just on demand it basically, without paying for it potentially. So, all right, we already talked about watching this, so we're not gonna bore you with that again. But anyways, come back in 1 week's time. We're talking about Watchmen. It's gonna be a long episode, I can already tell.
Yeah.
Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.